Let's turn our attentions to the Bundesliga, where a fascinating situation where Dortmund, who have struggled in parts this season, stand a chance of mathematically making a top four finish, which would see them in the Champions League, when they've been flirting with, another part of the league for most of the season. But I suppose if you win 6 out of 7 and the 7th is a draw against Bayern Munich, you are the informed team in the Bundesliga, aren't you?
That is true, Dotun, but they should have been too far adrift to manage it. We go back to 8 games left in the Bundesliga season. They're 10 points adrift of the top 4. It shouldn't be doable from there. But I guess 2 things have happened in the meantime. Firstly, talk about that draw with Bayern. I think even more crucial is the fact that they've knocked over a lot of competitors in that time. You look at other teams they've beaten Freiburg. They've beaten Mainz. They've beaten teams around them as well, which is super important. And now they're at this point where they have the final game of the Bundesliga season on Saturday at home to already relegated Holstein Kiel, albeit when they were in the death throes of the Nuri Sahin spell in charge, and that seems a really long time ago now, doesn't it? That they actually lost away to Holstein Kiel. If they win by 2 clear goals, it will take a mathematical miracle for them not to make the top 4. Because even though they're 5th at the moment, the 2 teams directly above them are Eintracht Frankfurt, who've been there for ages, in 3rd. They go away to Freiburg, who are 4th. So they're going to take points off each other. You know, both of those teams can't come away with wins. So what that means is, regardless of that result, if Dortmund get the result that they should against Holstein Kiel, they'll qualify, basically, which is remarkable. I mean, the only sense in which just a 2-0 win or a 2-goal win wouldn't do, because they'd go above Eintracht Frankfurt if they lost on goals scored, is if Eintracht Frankfurt were to lose 8-7 or 9-8 or something like that. So and then it's just if Dortmund were to win by 2 goals. And frankly, against Holstein Kiel on the final day, they should be capable of winning by more than a 2-goal margin. So look, this is remarkable. And I agree, Dotun. I think when you consider where they were, we've spoken in previous weeks about what a good job Niko Kovač has done. And I would go back to Lars's point in the last section about having someone outside the tent, from outside the tent. I think that's really important. Now, we've talked about how Kovač doesn't really feel like a Dortmund guy because it's all belt and braces, let's be disciplined, let's defend properly sort of coach. Funnily enough, over the space of those 7 games, they've gone along at 3.5 goals a game. So it's not just been defending. You know, they've been very expressive. He's got the most out of the attacking players. Of course, Guirassy has been great all season, but Karim Adeyemi has looked really good in recent weeks. Julian Brandt's found a bit more form, especially in the 4-2 winner at Bayer Leverkusen, in which they were efficient, it is fair to say, in front of goal. Adeyemi was asked about it earlier in the week and said, why do you think it is that you've been more clinical in front of goal? And he said it's because Kovač has put a ban on shooting practice. So normally at the end of training, that everyone likes to stay around and get a couple of shots off. And he just goes, no, get off the pitch. Save it for Saturday, which I think is quite funny. It's like the idea is, right, if you're going to show me that you can shoot, save it for the game. Which leaves them wanting a little bit more. It's really interesting how that works. And Adeyemi says, look, I feel like I'm really itching when I get off the pitch. I've not got to have a few shots at goal. But actually, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the games, it's really working. But I think because, as Lars said, where Barcelona, a little bit like Bayern, have looked for people who understand the club to get their brains and keep them inside the club. That's something that Dortmund have done to the nth degree in recent years. And then, of course, that spread to the coaching with Edin Terzic, and Nuri Sahin, neither of whom produced a coherent style of play, let alone the results. And actually, for someone in Kovač to come and not be bothered with all that, to not be weighed by that expectation, seems to have really helped them.
Yeah, Lars, did Dortmund get away with one this season, though? Because it could have gone really badly for them, whereas now it seems like their season could be saved if they make that top four.
Yeah, massively. And making that Champions League spot is so important in terms of the finances, in terms of the prestige. And let's not kid ourselves. I don't think they've found a magic solution now and it's going to be fine and they're going to set out like they have in the last games and challenge Bayern last season. I think they still need to strengthen. But being in the Champions League makes that a heck of a lot easier. Now, I was looking at like what Kovač has done differently, what the players are saying. It's kind of interesting how this is almost a little bit basic. And I mean, there's a way you can overcomplicate these things, I guess, especially when you take over mid-season, because there's only so much you can do. There's an interesting report in the German media that when he took over at Dortmund, he asked every player in the squad to come to his office, and he had a chat with them. And one of the things he asked them was, which position do you like to play in? Just write on a note. Where do you feel you play the best? And there were a number of players who were not being played where they feel the most comfortable and in the kind of role they want to play them under Sahin, and he addressed some of those concerns, and it's really helped. The other thing I saw, Bensebaini, the defender, has said that they put more emphasis on the physical side of things. There's a higher intensity in training, and there's more of an emphasis on fitness. Which this sounds like boneheadedly simple. I just play the players where they want to play and have a bit more intensity in training and work on the physical stuff. But like maybe that is what they needed. It's also interesting that he did change the formation. He started out with 4 at the back, went to 3, sort of a 3-4-3 thing. Now, they're actually set up in a similar way to what poor old Ruben Amorim is trying to do at Man United, but it seems to be a much better fit for quite a few of the players that Dortmund have. It gives you a little bit more protection to the defenders. I think Dortmund in the last few years have really struggled to find a defensive 2 that they feel comfortable with. But with Anton, Sula, and then Bensebaini at the back 3, that seems to work okay. Okay, if Guirassy says the key is no shooting practice, maybe. But I also think that sort of structure of having Brandt and Adeyemi closer to him in those sort of attacking roles, maybe that's more helpful, him getting more chances in the box. I mean, he's been on an absolute tear. Guirassy has been criticised at various points of this season because he hasn't always looked as sharp for Dortmund as he did for Stuttgart. But he is currently, I mean, I think he scored 8 in his last 5. I mean, it's something like this. I mean, he's really gone off on one now. And it leaves him with 20 goals and 28 in the Bundesliga and 13 and 12 in the Champions League for 33 goals and 50. Like, that's not bad for his first campaign in Dortmund, given that it was a bit of a crap season for the club. So, you know, there's some positive things there, and maybe what Dortmund need for next season is, make a couple of additions in the window, but let's not have a big sort of project manager. Let's not have a big philosopher in charge. Let's see what we can do with a full season with a very competent and by now pretty experienced Niko Kovač in charge.
I think you're right that doing the simple things well is something that's really like seduced everyone at the club. So Lars Ricken, who's the big guy in charge now, Hans-Joachim Watzke is going to step aside. He spoke in recent days and has sort of rejected the idea of a massive overhaul. I think there's a balance to be had because clearly stuff has been wrong and the squad has been uneven, I think, for a while as well. But I think that Ricken wants to hold on to the simple things that they've done well in recent weeks. I mean, I think you're right. It is quite... Look, intensity is something they have lacked for a long time, for seasons, I think. And that is something that's expected at Dortmund. And when we talk about Dortmund's style of football, I think we tend to envisage that as prettier than the football that Kovač plays. But no, it's a working class area where people demand intensity. And it's exactly the same thing at Schalke, although obviously they're a lot shorter of that. But I think if you can do the simple things well, the fact is we've seen in recent weeks, especially with the way they've taken the chances in games like that Leverkusen game at the weekend, they've got good enough players to be able to take advantage of that. There is still an enormous amount of talent in that squad. And Guirassy is the best example of that. Someone who is seemingly a little bit like a Bruno Fernandes, like unaffected. Of course, they're very different players, but like completely unaffected by external factors. It's like, we're shit. Okay, I'll continue scoring, which is an interesting thing, really, how he can kind of make himself an island from that. But they still need to, if they're going to be sustainable, and like this is before we even talk about like challenging Bayern or anything like that, they still need to be at a point where they slim down that squad. To strengthen, they need to slim. And there are a lot of high earners who are just like who've been doing nothing there for a long time. Now they still, even though he's been better in recent weeks, they still might get rid of Julian Brandt. Nicolas Sula has got a monstrous salary that I think they probably need to do something with as well. Maybe Adeyemi will go. Marcel Sabitzer is another one who's on the chopping block. Look, there's a few that once the season is over and they can say, thank goodness we made the Champions League, they can't be sitting there going, oh yeah, well, everything's fine now, as you say. You know, they need to be able to say, these are the mistakes we've made in terms of squad construction. These are the players that we need to dump if we can, obviously, because they're a lot of them are earning an enormous amount of money. And they need to take the lessons from the first 3 quarters of the season rather than just cling to the last quarter, I think. As you can hear in the background, perhaps the Dortmund board are readying the power tools already.
I was actually going to, I mean, we're moving on pretty soon, I think, but are we at that stage now with Adeyemi, who you name checked there as someone who's, because Adeyemi is interesting for me. One of the things that kind of brought Dortmund a lot of success was this ability to look at a guy and say, yes, you're going to be a European superstar. We're going to spend what we have to spend to bring you in. We're going to give you a lot of playing time. And I think we all expected Adeyemi to be the next one off the rank there when we had that row of Jadon Sancho, of Jude Bellingham, of Erling Haaland. I certainly was expecting Adeyemi to be someone coming when he came in from Salzburg, lightning quick. You know, everyone wanted him. He was scoring goals in Austria. He's going to be the guy. And he just hasn't been the guy. He's been fine, but rarely more than that. And it just doesn't seem to be happening for him.
No, you're right. Not consistent enough. And I think that's quite indicative of where they've run aground in recent times. You know, not enough of the guys they brought in have turned into bona fide stars. Now, I think actually where Jamie Gittins is at the moment is quite interesting, because he's had nowhere near as good a second half of the season as he did first. And now they're looking at it very much. I think he would like to go probably back to the Premier League, but they're also thinking, look, his value's not going to get any higher than this. Let's move on from it. And I think you have to be brave enough to do that.
Yeah, and that is one of those, like, it's easy to sit here and say that. Like, it's easy to say, oh, just buy the best 19-year-olds in Europe and it'll be fine. But that was the model. That's what Dortmund were doing. They had like a smattering of experienced pros to form a backbone of the team, and then they had an uncanny ability to find like the next big thing. And it's been a series of years now where, as you mentioned, some of those players in the backbone have been a little bit overpaid and a little bit underperforming. And the kids they brought in just haven't been the right ones. And I guess, you know, you can't keep up that record forever of always picking the next big thing. But yeah, it would be very handy for them if they could get back on the right track with that again.